Hello and welcome to the MBOM podcast, where you'll learn to master the business of yoga. MBOM is a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith. I'm a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, a yoga business coach, and a total business geek. Here at MBOM, you'll learn everything you need to know to create a sustainable yoga business by learning from myself and guests from around the world about how they built their yoga businesses, and about how you too can become a successful yoga teacher, studio owner, and much more. All right, let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Mastering the Business of Yoga. I am super excited and grateful, as always, that you're joining me for today's episode of the show. And today on the podcast, I'm really excited to be joined by a guest who's been on the show before, Jaffer Hussain. Jaffer is a yoga teacher based out of Toronto, Canada, who teaches in-person classes as well as has his own online membership, amongst many other things that he's doing and offering yoga teachers. And he came on the podcast back in June of 2021 to share how he created a unique yoga membership offering audio classes. And now, more than 2 years later, he's back to share what he's been up to and how his business has evolved. And one of the biggest additions that Jaffer has made to his offerings over the last few years has been to provide mentorship to other yoga teachers. And I love this topic because this is how yoga was passed down before we had Yoga Alliance and 200 and 300 hour YTTs and all that type of stuff. Everything was through mentorship. And I feel like there are a lot of yoga teachers doing mentorship, but it's not the way that so many people are learning to teach or learning how to improve their teaching. And I think that it is a really underrated topic. So in this episode, we talk about yoga teacher mentorship, why having a mentor can benefit both the quality of your teaching and your business, what Jaffer's offering, and so much more. And then we also dive into some tips to avoid burnout, especially as a full-time yoga teacher, teaching at multiple studios, teaching online, all that type of stuff. And then we talk about business lessons and so much more. So this episode is jam-packed with goodness, and I hope you guys really enjoy it. Before we get into it, I just wanted to talk a little bit about my new book, How to Master the Business of Yoga, because Jaffer's first interview, which I mentioned we did back in June of 2021, is actually in the book. It's under the section about memberships, and we talk about teaching virtual audio classes and running a yoga membership. And we've got a little section on his story and how he got into teaching this, how he ended up in a situation where he was teaching entirely in person and basically had to turn everything online during the pandemic, as many yoga teachers did. And he created this super unique membership. He's one of the only or few people that I've heard of who's doing audio class memberships. So we talk a little bit about that. And then there's a section on business lessons, as always. And then, of course, some yoga business homework that helps you to just think about how you could maybe use this membership model in your business. So if you guys want to check out Jaffer's section, if you want to check out the book, head on over to mbomyoga.com/book. Otherwise, let's get into today's episode of the show. I hope you guys enjoy. And without further ado, here is Jaffer. Welcome to the podcast today, Jaffer. I'm really excited to have you here with me.
Yeah, thank you for having me back. I'm pumped.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you back. And tell us where you're based. Are you still based in the same place you were 2.5 years ago?
Yeah, I'm still based in Toronto and working downtown. Biggest difference is my kids are older and they travel with me to a lot of my classes these days.
Yeah, and you've got a second one since we chatted last.
Yeah. Little Miss Luna.
Yeah, very, very cute. We were just chatting offline that our little gals are pretty close in age, which is really fun. I wish we were a little bit closer so we could have a yoga play date. But maybe sometime in the future that'll happen. But on that note, the last episode came out June of 2021. That was a while ago. I mean, we were like still in the pandemic. You know, life was very different. You had one kid less. I had no kids at that point. Catch us up. What have you been up to over the last couple of years in terms of like your business, teaching yoga? What shifted for you?
Yeah, what has shifted? So it's crazy that it seems like it's a really long time ago, but then also not that long ago when you think that it's only 2 years. However, I think the biggest shift has just been being back to studio. It was a totally different mindset in terms of planning business as a yoga teacher and thinking of all the virtual offerings that you could have. And now it's different in the sense that you're back to going to different studios and teaching in person and teaching these classes that have, 30, some places I teach 40 or 50 people in the class, and everybody's in the same room again and breathing and moving together. So that's been really welcomed. Like if I think back to when we first started doing those, it was just so nice to hear people breathe again after teaching virtual classes. And, you can't necessarily hear their breath or hear the pace in which they're breathing. And sometimes you can't see the pace in which they're moving because their cameras are off. But it's been nice to adjust back to normal life to an extent. I mean, I don't think anything's going to go back to exactly normal. And retreats have kind of picked up. It's been nice to do yoga retreats again. I think after we spoke later that year, I hosted my first international one, kind of right before the Omicron wave. And we had this little small window of time where we got to go away. And then we came back, and a month later, everything shut down again, at least here in Canada. We, I think, led the standings in worldwide shutdowns.
I think so. Yeah, unfortunately.
So now it's just back into full swing with in-person events, still maintaining some of the virtual things, and but not as much. Definitely seeing like a decrease in demand for virtual offerings as people are ready to go back into doing in-person things and practicing in person, going to their local studios. And so it's been fun to just be back in community.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, what's interesting about that is I was telling you before we started, I was just back in Canada over this past summer, and we spent 5 weeks there, and we've been back to Canada. We were back during the early days of the pandemic and when we had no idea what was going on. And then we were back, every summer since then. And I feel like I finally was like, okay, I feel like it's almost like pre-pandemic Canada again. And like you said, things are not going to go back. I mean, we've gone through a huge global event. It's shifted people and countries and communities and industries like yoga in a really big way. But I kind of felt like, okay, I feel like we're like in a new chapter now, which felt really nice. And I feel like that's what I'm hearing, from people as well, especially yoga teachers. Like, classes are finally busy again. People are like excited to do things like retreat. People are ready to travel, all that type of stuff, which I think is really nice for those of us who are doing that type of stuff pre-pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Nailed it. Yeah. People are very excited to get back into the travel piece of life. And so yoga retreats have just been a really nice thing to offer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing to hear. And you kind of mentioned this, but I'm curious, like, what percentage are you teaching virtual now? Because I mean, at the time of talking, I think you were doing basically everything virtual. And obviously, I feel like, with the rules and regulations in Canada, I feel like there was like an extra level of like adaptive, like you had to adapt as a yoga business because it was like open, shut down, open, shut down, open, shut down, which is so confusing and so hard as a business owner and as a student. But yeah, I'm curious, like what percentage you're still teaching of virtuals or how much virtuals you're still doing.
Yeah, the interest, I think I mentioned this on the last podcast where when I was pricing my virtual offerings, I wanted to price them in a way that they could still coexist alongside the studio models. I always had every intention to go back to teaching in studio. So with my virtual offerings, I upload 2 new classes a month and they're pre-recorded. And what I actually do is because everything's audio recorded, and this was what I was doing pre-pandemic, I just hook up a mic to myself every couple of weeks when I'm teaching my in-studio classes, and those get uploaded straight to my online platform. So it's no additional work on my end. I'm not recording classes much from home. Once in a while, I'll record something specifically for the virtual platform, but most of them are just live class recordings. And so I upload 2 classes a month to my virtual platform. And while there's been a dip, right? Some people have canceled their memberships and said they're going back to studio. Many people have also kept on the membership for the simple fact that travel is back, as we mentioned. So when they travel or they go to the cottage in the summer, they can put on my audio classes and practice on their dock or on their deck and in their hotel rooms and things of that nature. So the virtual aspect, it was basically what I was doing pre-pandemic, but I was only doing 1 class a month. So now I'm offering 2 new classes a month to my virtual on-demand platform. And it just consistently kind of stays there and provides, honestly, a revenue stream that was non-existent pre-pandemic. So something is better than nothing. And it's kind of one of the silver linings that I see in my business is that there's this whole stream of income that provides that never existed before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing that that came out of the pandemic. And I think it's really interesting kind of now that we seem to be sort of through it to kind of look at the silver linings that have come out of it. And I think that, you know, like I worked for studios for so long and we always experienced, especially, summer in Canada, it's like people pausing memberships, people canceling memberships because they're going away. They're going to see family. They're traveling. They're going to be outside a bunch. They're going to the lake, cottages, cabins, all that good stuff. And now that it's like, there's these on-demand video libraries or on-demand audio libraries. They understand how to use them. It's like very familiar with them from the past years. It's like now they're just keeping that stuff. And it's beautiful because they can continue their yoga practice with their favorite teachers from home. And I love that. I love that we've like entered this era of yoga where we can, basically take our favorite yoga teachers wherever we want. And I feel like as a yoga teacher with a yoga business, it's like a really great revenue stream to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Totally. You don't have to just find the random YouTube class that you don't know what you're going to get.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even as a consumer myself, I had this like kind of like a workout app and it was because, gyms were closed. I needed something to do at home. And then I was pregnant, postpartum, all that type of stuff. And it's like, I just kept it because it's like, it's so easy for me to have it. It's like affordable enough that I can do it. And now it's like, I can do it anytime, anywhere. I don't have to stress about deciding on a workout, et cetera, et cetera. They've got yoga, all that type of stuff. So I really love the idea of that, both as like, from a business standpoint and as a consumer. I feel like it's just really convenient to take that stuff with us everywhere that we go.
Yeah, totally.
Hey, yoga teachers, we're just taking a quick break from the podcast to talk about Offering Tree. Now, I have a question for you. How many paid subscriptions to different platforms do you have in your business? Is it 1, 2, 5, more than that? Subscriptions can be stealthy. You sign up for free, you use the platform for a while, and then discover that you have to upgrade to a paid plan, and suddenly you find you are subscribed all over the place and the costs are ramping up. Well, with Offering Tree, you get to cancel all your subscriptions because you can pull everything all together in one place. This is one of the things that I love most about the Offering Tree platform. Your website, email marketing, on-demand library, blog, booking software, and even accepting payments happens all right there in one platform. And most importantly, with one very responsive support team. I had an issue with one of my courses the other day. I sent them a message and within a couple hours, I had it solved. I was super impressed. So what are you waiting for? Head on over to offeringtree.com/MBOM to sign up for a no commitment free trial and get a little discount if you do decide to work with Offering Tree. Once again, that's offeringtree.com/MBOM. All right, now back to the episode. Amazing. Awesome. Well, thanks for catching us up. And I'm excited to kind of dive into mentorship and talk about that. I feel like a good place to start would be just hearing like how mentorship has benefited you, like in terms of, from a place of like becoming a better teacher, even a better practitioner, how has mentorship kind of served you in your life?
Yeah, I've been fortunate to have amazing mentors and amazing people to like look up to in along my journey. And when I was in my teacher training, I remember a teacher that I had practiced pretty frequently with. I used to work for Lululemon and built relationships with a lot of different ambassadors within different communities. And one particular individual was a studio owner and became a good friend alongside, a lot of business stuff that we did together as she was an ambassador. But I remember when I told her that I finished when I was in teacher training, she invited me to assist a yoga retreat with her before I even completed my teacher training. And she was just so excited that I was someone who had gone down this path, and she brought me in to assist her retreat. And that was kind of, I guess, my first experience of being in this, not a student role, but actually just beside the teacher, watching the teacher teach. And it was an interesting experience because you can take your favorite teacher's classes all the time. You don't necessarily see how they carry themselves in a class environment. And I think that was my first experience of just watching somebody else teach a class, how they navigated, how they landed and offered hands-on assists. And after that first weekend in 2015, summer of 2015, she offered to co-host a retreat with me the following summer. She's like, I want to lead a retreat with you. I think it would be great. And I was like, I don't even have any public classes yet. And she's like, don't worry, you got a year to figure that out. And when we co-hosted that retreat together a year later, I was just fortunate. She had the ability to deliver feedback in a very candid and constructive way. And she would tell me language, this, do this more, do this less, try not to say that, say this, here's why, this is how you can connect with your students more. She was my guide to also teaching yoga off the mat. Her studio at the time, none of the yoga teachers would ever lay down a mat. That was one of the things that she had in terms of the brand she wanted to create in her studio, and wanted teachers to be able to offer this kind of non-visual experience of yoga where you can communicate as clearly as possible so that people can follow along with their eyes closed. And so she was my mentor when it came to all things verbal teaching and off the mat teaching and delivering hands-on assists. And I kind of just feel like I'm at a place in my life now where I want to take some of that information and pass it forward. The reason being, this was all in Kingston, Ontario. And I remember when I came back to Toronto, I couldn't find teachers that taught like this. I really resonated with teachers who taught in a way that that didn't require me to look as often. And it was a bit more internal based, and a lot of off the mat, and receiving hands-on assists is obviously a favorite of mine. And it was hard to find teachers that taught like that. And I found over the years, a lot of the, I guess, longevity and success I've had is because of the method in which I teach. I constantly hear from students, they come back for the shoulder press in Shavasana and for the smell of essential oils on my hands. And I don't think I'm doing anything creative or out there when it comes to the sequencing and the depth of the knowledge that I'm offering. It's all there, but there's this one element that students often come back for, and it's, they feel more connected because I'm walking around, or I'm cueing the rest of the class while my hands are on them, giving them an assist, and they just feel more connected. So I've been trying over the last, I guess, 3 or 4 years, even before the pandemic, to try to work this into some form of mentorship program, because there's so many benefits to it. I could break my arm and still teach my full yoga schedule. I could walk in on crutches if I tore something playing sports or lifting weights at the gym and still teach my full yoga schedule. There's so much value to be had in being able to teach off the mat. It saves energy, right? Like I'm not spent. My physical body's not tired. And I just find there's so much benefit to it. And then same with the retreats. As I've built up retreats, I want to try to turn those into mentorship opportunities in the same way that retreat was an opportunity for me to learn. And, this teacher, this mentor of mine showed me everything to know about running a retreat. And till this day, I schedule and plan my retreats in a similar fashion. And I just kind of want to pay some of that forward. So I haven't really figured out, from a business standpoint, what it looks like in terms of driving income for myself. I'm just really trying to find ways for yoga teachers to connect, because post-pandemic, I feel like we've lost a lot of that. We've lost a lot of teacher-to-teacher connection. It's slowly starting to come back. You're teaching in studio, you see the teacher before and the teacher after, and you're starting to mix and mingle a little bit. But a lot of old faces have moved on to new careers. A lot of people pivoted away. A lot of new faces have come in. There's a lot of younger teachers, and no one's talking to them about teaching yoga off the mat. No one's talking to them about how to run a yoga retreat, really. I mean, at least in my community that I'm witnessing, or how to handle burnout, or how to have studio conversations, when to ask for a raise, what's a fair expectation. All these conversations have become so heavy in the yoga industry. And I think the pandemic illuminated a lot of it, that I just feel like it's a natural step for me to be in a place where I can hopefully start to facilitate the conversations and just create sort of a support network where we can just chat and talk and be like, oh yeah, I've experienced that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's beautiful. There's so many things there that I want to touch on. But I feel like the first is that, from my understanding, obviously I've only been teaching, basically the same amount of time as you, which 2015 was when I did my first teacher training. But from the more like advanced experienced teachers that I've talked to, this was like how things were pre like 200-hour YTT, 300-hour YTT, like, Yoga Alliance type thing was, you had a teacher that you really resonated with and you started mentoring with them. And that's how you learned how to teach yoga. And, obviously we're in the industry is very different now. There's it is an industry. There's a lot of demand for it. Yoga's mainstream. So of course we need to adapt, but I love the idea of like being able to come out of teacher training and have somebody that you really connect with that you can learn from, because my experience as a yoga teacher was extremely, I don't know, maybe like lonely, but also like, what the heck am I doing a little bit? Like there was nobody to guide me. Like, it's like, here, fly, little yoga teacher. Yes, I have a YTT. I'm a 200-hour certified yoga teacher. I can teach yoga, but like, how on earth do I do this? And that's very much where my podcast was born. And I think that, sure, resources like this can serve people in a big way. But I think more than that is like, you need somebody that's in your local community. Like they understand what you're trying to do and they can actually, help you with the things that you want to do and that type of thing. Like I love the idea of bringing back kind of how yoga used to be passed on to teachers and kind of adapting it to our current environment. Even things like, how do I approach a studio owner? And then once I get a job, how do I negotiate pay? Or I've been teaching forever and I haven't got a raise. How do I have that conversation? Like that type of stuff is so confusing and so complicated. And it can just feel like, yeah, just like you're like on a desert island by yourself and you don't know how to swim, like you have no options.
Because we don't have a culture of feedback in studios. It's not often that when you're working at a studio that the studio owner is there to like give you constructive criticism on your classes. So the only feedback you're getting on your classes really is like the few students that say great class, and they're going to say that regardless. They're not going to tell you terrible class. And then if they like it, they're going to come back. If they don't like it, you're never going to see them again. And you never really know why or what, or you may get the random review on a ClassPass app or a MindBody app, but you really don't there's no feedback. And I realized that, I had one person in my life that gave me such powerful feedback about just language in my yoga classes that if it wasn't for that one person, like I would have been swimming and not able to figure it out. And, my classes wouldn't be what they are today if it wasn't for somebody to say, hey, try saying this instead of that. Or, just, little things like if you're teaching off the mat, it's actually better to teach from the back of the room. You'll never mess up your lefts and your rights. Like little things like that,
Totally. Yeah. Just like a little thing that's like kind of like, it makes so much sense. Like it's kind of intuitive, but if you've like, somebody's ever encouraged you to do that, like you might not think that on your own.
Yeah.
I really loved what you were talking about too with like going to watch somebody. This was actually one of the exercises we were required to do for my 300-hour training. The program I took was really, really good quality. And, we could choose that we were kind of given like, we could like go to any of the teachers who were part of the faculty, or if we had a teacher we really liked, then we could ask if we could go see them too. But I went and just sat in the corner of one of the faculty while they were teaching. And it's so interesting because when you're practicing with a teacher that you know and love, it's like you can kind of pinpoint the things you like about the class. You can kind of take, little tidbits to add in your classes. But it's such a different experience to actually watch a teacher. And it's like the exact thing you were talking about, like watching the way they like conduct the room, I feel like is so powerful as a teacher. Because if you're just on your mat doing your thing, you're not watching where they are in space or how they're holding the space or how they're moving around, or are they using their hands, or like being able to see like, oh, she just did a cue because she's like looking at somebody's body. Like that's how she got that cue.
Yeah. Cueing in response to the room, right? It's not just robotic. You're seeing it and you cue it. And you said conduct, right? Like you're literally like a conductor conducting the class. Sorry to cut you off, but that's
no. That's it's powerful. Like for anyone who's listening, if you have a teacher, if you have somebody you really love, see if you can maybe like mentor them, quote unquote, because I think that would be really powerful. But even see if you can watch them teach, like sit in the corner, you don't practice, you don't do a single pose. Just watch them, watch the way that they lead the class. Because it was, such a powerful learning experience for me.
My 200 hour had the same. I think we had like a structure for note taking. I have it somewhere where it was like, write down anything about the sequence, write down any habits that you notice from the teacher, like anything they do repetitively. And then one of the columns was like, anything you want to take with you, right? Like write down anything that this teacher does that you would love to incorporate into your teaching. And yeah, I think you had to do it for like 3 or 4 different teachers or something like that. And such an amazing exercise to just watch. I remember in my early days, I would also just listen to classes, driving to studios or commuting to studios. I would just listen to yoga classes and just pick up on the audio cues and what they were saying and where they were going. And that would help strengthen my voice too, and kind of a way of doing observation, but through listening. So beneficial.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I think that that's a really great tip as well, is like, yeah, listening to classes to hear and not doing them. I think that's the key, is like, because when we start doing them, we get into our own experience of the class, which is like, that's a whole other part of it, right? Like, of course, we need to be like practicing with other teachers, and especially teachers who are more experienced than us. And, we can learn a lot from that. But I think it's just like learning how they teach and listening to how they teach, watching how they teach is so powerful when it comes to mentorship and just, learning more as a teacher. Ready to supercharge your career and business success? Coach Pals is the ultimate networking platform tailored exclusively for wellness professionals like yourself. Coach Pals focuses on empowering connections that truly transform your path. Whether you're a dedicated yoga teacher or an ambitious yoga business owner, they've got you covered with innovative features designed just for you. Let's talk about Coach Pals professional profiles. They're not your typical resumes. They're dynamic showcases of your expertise, experience, and skills, enriched with your wellness passion, journey, and community impact. With testimonials and skill endorsements, your profile becomes a magnetic hub for partners and clients. Imagine having a central space that unites your professional identity, opening doors to limitless opportunities thanks to the power of effective networking. From dream job openings to fruitful partnerships and supportive communities, Coach Pals truly has it all. Use code MBOM, that's MBOM, to enjoy your first month free when subscribing to a professional monthly plan. Learn more about Coach Pals Pro membership benefits at coachpals.com/memberships. Once again, use code MBOM when you're signing up to get your first month free. All right, now back to the episode. I think one of the things you said too that I wanted to dive into is this idea of just like, I think kind of like the loneliness factor as a yoga teacher, because I think this was something I didn't really expect when I started teaching. I had yoga teacher friends, and obviously like you're in front of people, like you have a class full of people. So you're putting energy and you're putting out energy rather, and you're doing extroverted stuff, but it's like, you do really only see the teachers that maybe teach before you and teach after. And I feel like it's usually like a passing hello. Sometimes you don't even know them. And if the studio doesn't do like regular staff meetings or get-togethers, which I think a lot of studios have really shied away from over the last couple of years, it can just be kind of like you're just, again, on this island by yourself. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are on, ways to like build a network of teachers, build a community of teachers, and especially like like-minded teachers.
How to build a community of teachers. Yeah, this is what I'm kind of trying to do by creating like a monthly Zoom call where teachers can come in and we can join and we can talk together about whatever it is, right? So I've been trying to develop that as like kind of I call it the business support network for yoga teachers. I couldn't think of a more clever name, but that's exactly what I want it to be, is just a business support network. And so right now it's really in its infancy stages. It's totally free. And I do a lot of the invites, like kind of one-on-one through yoga teachers that I see in the community, that I meet, that I talk to. And we're just starting to like build different topics. So like my last one, we talked about retreats, and that turned out to be my biggest call, in the sense that people were really excited to talk about retreats. And I had people jump on that had never run retreats before, and they just wanted to listen and hear what other people have done. Then I had people that were in the middle of running a retreat or about to run a retreat, but struggling to sell spots. And it was just really interesting to just have this conversation. And I kind of position it like, a lot of the times people just want to go for a cup of coffee and chat. And sometimes as a yoga teacher with two children, I don't have time to talk to a lot of yoga teachers one-on-one. And I kind of just structure it in that way of like, let's just hang out and have a conversation. But community is everything. And even when people sign up for my yoga teacher newsletter, that kind of gives them access to the monthly Zoom calls, I give them a free webinar that I recorded. And I call it the Business of Yoga and the 5 Pillars of Foundation. And the first two things, which a lot of people might not think of when it comes to the business side of yoga, is I talk about student first mentality and community. So if you're maintaining your student practice, that means you're going to classes and being in community. And then when it comes to building community, there's two aspects to it. First, you have to find a community to be in, but then you also have to nurture and build that community by showing up to events or, inviting people to different events in the community that are going on yoga related. But I find it's hard because a lot of the times as teachers, we're working all at the same time.
We're hustling, right? Like the hustle is real.
The hustle is real. So, and then typically, usually middle of the afternoon, we don't have any classes. But then as a yoga teacher, you're probably eating or nourishing yourself or resting or taking a nap or probably working a day job to make ends meet. So finding the time for us to connect is tough. And that's why I think I've leaned into doing it virtually right now, because gathering people is definitely a challenge, especially we're still freshly out of the pandemic. And those that are working are really hustling and doing everything they can to make their ends meet.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you're doing that. And I feel really aligned with those pillars that you were talking about as well. It's one of the things that when I teach the business of yoga, especially to new teachers, like one of the first things that I say is like, you have to be practicing. You have to maintain your practice. I feel like it's like if you're building a house per se, I feel like if you're trying to like build a yoga business without practicing, it's kind of like you just didn't lay the foundation, right? Like your house could blow over, it could like cave in. It's like it doesn't have the foundation. Like you need to have that. That's the reason that we became yoga teachers. It's like the heart of what we do. And I feel like if you're not practicing, it's like, how can you show up and teach other people? How can you show up and give to other people if you don't have your own practice?
Yeah, I'd love to ask you, like, what do you see as the biggest roadblock? Like, why does that happen so often? And I see that like teachers start turning their class times that they're teaching into their personal practice times as well. And I don't know, like, why do you, like on your end, through your work, you've been working in the business of yoga sector for so long, like, why does that happen?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I feel like it kind of ties back to so much of what we were talking about, because you'd mentioned like, yeah, using the class as their practice. And then I feel like it takes away from the quality of teaching because they're not watching the room, right? Like we were talking about how watching the room, like walking around the room, like leading with your voice, like huge benefits to that, right? In terms of the class you're delivering on top of, I think, being a more sustainable teacher, because you're not like powering through poses while like huffing off your breath and maybe injuring yourself or all of a sudden diving into a pose you're not warmed up for, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't know if I necessarily know the answer to this, but I think from my experience and from teachers I've talked to, it comes maybe from a little bit of like burnout. Like, I think there can be like, do you want to practice yoga when you've taught like 5 hours of yoga? Like I think that can kind of come, or people feel really busy, or there's like kind of scarcity mindset where I need to teach all these classes to like pay my bills. And, I don't have time or energy at the end of the day to do my practice. And I get that because I taught yoga full time for a while and it was very exhausting. It was one of the reasons I looked into, can I do something else with my business? Can I expand a little bit? But I think, your practice can look so different. Like sometimes we get in our head where it needs to be an hour and a half of Ashtanga or an hour of Vinyasa flow. And I have to do as many Chaturangas as I'm going to guide my students through. But I think the real like advanced practice comes from tuning in with what you need. And maybe what you need is 10 minutes of sitting and breathing. And I think that can be practice, right? I think sometimes we get in our heads that it needs to look a certain way as a yoga teacher. And then sometimes we don't do it because we have this expectation. And then we're like, oh crap, I haven't practiced today. So I'll like do it in my 3 p.m. class. And then your 3 p.m. class isn't quality because you're busy practicing at the front.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. I talk about that too, in the sense that, like, what is the definition of a daily practice? The sutras don't tell us that it has to be a 90-minute or a 60-minute practice at a studio, right? Like, your yoga practice could be touching base on the yamas and the niyamas and putting those into play in your daily life, right? And broadening our description of what the daily practice is, because it doesn't have to be physical. And it can also be the solution to burnout.
Totally. Yeah, I'm curious if you have any additional thoughts on that from your experience. And then I would actually love to touch on burnout as well, because I think that this is a piece to the puzzle for sure.
Yeah. So I mean, right with what you said too about the 10-minute, like, just defining the practice as, like, sometimes it is just breathing for 10 minutes. Sometimes it is just like cleaning my house calmly, you know, right? Just being patient with it, like treating it like a karma yoga practice, to have a clean space. And to clean space means I have a clear mind, and clear mind means I can focus and get the tasks done that I need to get done. And it's about being present. So I think it's when we talk about student first mentality or the burnout piece of it, yeah, it's about taking the practice deeper beyond just the asana portion of it.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I also have a client that I'm working right now, one-on-one, and she's actually a newer teacher. And one of the first things we did together was just look at her schedule to see she wants more classes, she wants more people in them, she wants to make more money. Just like, I feel like I need to have an understanding of your current schedule. And one of the things she told me is that she goes to bed early so she can get up early and do her practice. And, she dedicates like about an hour to it. She likes to do breath work, meditation, and something physical. And she's like, part of what I'm trying to create is sort of this like non-negotiable routine. And it means that I'm not going to take anything in the mornings before like, 8 or 9 a.m. so she can get up and do this. And then she's also not going to teach like really late at night, because that's going to compromise her being able to go to bed on time to get up. And I really love that she's like doing this for herself, that she's given herself this like non-negotiable time. So even if she's offered like a 6 a.m. class, she's like, I'm not going to take those types of classes because this is the time I know I need for myself. And I really admire that, like, knowing that she needs that, because I think sometimes with like the hustle mentality and with scarcity mindset, it's like, we're just like, I have to say yes to every little thing, even if it doesn't really fit my lifestyle or like my schedule very well. And I get that, because sometimes we have to say yes to things, but I'm also like, can we create our ideal schedule and like bring in the opportunities that like work best for us to show up as who we need to show up for our students?
Yeah, it's amazing. That's an amazing, like, discipline and dedication to get into, because yeah, having some kind of routine when you're running a yoga business, you're an entrepreneur, and if you can lose your rhythm and your daily routine so quickly, so having something that creates structure, for sure, so important. I mean, it took me having kids to realize I can't teach a 6 a.m., 7 a.m. yoga class anymore. I wish I had that awareness prior to, but in the beginning, I said yes to everything, and just I also feel like there's a period in time in which it's okay to do that, to say yes to everything and hustle, but there has to be an end to like a means to the end, right? Like, I did it strategically in the beginning, almost as a way to like build up my rate, right? I would say yes to a class, to a new studio or a new class that was offering me more money, so that I can go back to the previous studios that were the lowest paying studio and say, hey, can we ask for a raise? Obviously in a nice way, if it's been like a year of teaching or whatever. And then I used it as a way to slowly build up into higher paying teaching jobs. And at the same time, I was promoting a newsletter all the time and social media all the time. So even if I left the studio because, say, they weren't willing to pay what I wanted or what made sense for my life, or my rate increase, that the students that really enjoyed my classes, they were still engaged and still a part of my community, even if I left the studio. I found that was a big part of avoiding burnout, in the sense that I was building my business. I was taking on a lot of classes early in the first 2 years, but I was also building my social following and my newsletter following at the same time. So now, 8 years later, I'll put on a workshop and somebody who I haven't seen since 2017 will end up in my workshop, or someone who I haven't seen since 2018 will end up on a retreat with me in Mexico or Costa Rica. So there always has to be like that and a means to an end. Like do the hustle in the beginning because you're launching your business. What business model doesn't need a hustle in the beginning? But there has to be some goals set to like pull you out of that. Once you reach a certain threshold of like, okay, now I'm making this much per class, I could start teaching less classes and start to take away. Because what I found was, or I find it's, you can't go to a studio or a gym and say, hey, I want to teach at 12 o'clock. Well, I have a teacher at 12 o'clock. So like it might be 20 years before that teacher gives up that 22 at 12 o'clock class. So sometimes you have to take what's available. But once you take everything on, then you can cut the classes that don't fit. Does that make sense? So that was kind of my strategy around it. I would say yes to everything. And I'd be like, okay, now that I have 20 classes on my schedule, I can cut these 5 and then give myself a day off here and have that schedule structure there. And so so that's the way I did it. But
I love that. I think that that's great. That was kind of a little bit more my approach as well. Maybe with less classes and stuff like that. But I'm curious because I love the idea that you were also like building your social, building your email newsletter. I love that. I'm a big fan of that. I'm curious kind of how you approach that. Especially when you're teaching in studios, like, would you just, let people know at the end of classes, or kind of how did you kind of get people on your list and following you and stuff?
well, this was from my experience of practicing at a donation-based studio. So my teacher, that was my mentor, she had a donation-based studio in Kingston. And it was the first time when I took classes where at the end of every class, the teacher would make studio announcements. Whether it was the owner or any other teachers, they'd make announcements. And the first announcement would always be about like the structure, the donation, pay what you can, right? They'd give a little spiel. But then they'd also throw out like, this is what's coming up at the studio. This is what's happening here. And they would always leave, like if it was a 60-minute class, they would always leave 3 minutes to fill that time. You're going in there, you're expecting to be there for 60 minutes. They're not going 5-10 minutes over to promote themselves or talk about all their marketing initiatives. They're giving you 3 quick tips or 3 quick pieces of information before you leave to like keep the community going. And I'm surprised at how many teachers are so scared to do the end of class announcement. Meanwhile, they're stressing out over paid Facebook ads or Instagram ads for their promotions and for their workshops and their retreats. And I'm like, yo, you're teaching X amount of classes already. All these people love you. They're coming every single week. Just tell them what workshop you have coming up. Don't pay Instagram or Facebook for an advertisement that's going to people that you don't even know. But it was the end of class announcements. And so I had that courage and I had the encouragement to do it from the early on, to always say, jafferyoga.com, Jaffer Yoga on Instagram. I'd love to get to know you off the mat as well as on the mat. Feel free to follow me and send me a message, ask any questions. And it just started like that, just straight up, just like wanting to create community. And then the newsletter entered in as a way to nurture and build that community, because I couldn't do it through Instagram. I just didn't like it to have to follow everybody back and scroll through and keep updates on people. Like it just
send a message like, hey, how's it going?
Yeah. I was like, I'm going to send a newsletter and y'all can feel free to respond back anytime you want. And I will exchange info with you that way. I share pictures about my kids. I share pictures of my yoga retreats, and, just my whole life goes into the newsletter as a way of building community and fostering community. So end of class announcements from a business of yoga standpoint, it's less about like, having a business plan and having all these things. I find if you're able to announce things at the end of your classes, you'll feel like your workshops sell more, your community will grow, your retreats will sell better. And it takes the pressure kind of down a little bit, That's what I find anyways.
No, I love that because I think that it is interesting kind of this mindset of being really scared of just making these like really quick kind of, it doesn't even have to be salesy, just like letting people know where they can get more of you, find more of you, connect with you, which I think a lot of people do want to do. And they can take it or leave it, right? Like it's not you're forcing them to do anything. But yeah, it is interesting to think about the fear around that, but being willing to like throw money at Facebook ads to kind of like send stuff into the abyss. And it's like, I don't know, anytime people ask me, especially new teachers, about Facebook ads, I'm like, well, unless you have like something to promote and you know who you're promoting it to, it's really not a good use of your money. Like, let's start with the people who are actually in front of you, you know? And I think that, I think there's fear there. I think maybe there's uncertainty there. I guess there's also like, if you're teaching for a studio, there can be like a little bit of like, am I allowed to do this? But you know, maybe the studio owner doesn't want you like leaving a sign up sheet out for your email newsletter, but just saying like, hey, if you want to connect with me further, here's how you can find me is like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think I've ever met a studio owner who's like, do not tell people your website or social media.
Yeah. Yeah. But here's the other part of that equation is what I found, even seasoned teachers so wrapped up in the hustle that their website's also not updated. You know, it doesn't have their most recent class schedule, but it's on their social media. But I'm like, your website is a way for people to find you. People aren't going to be able to Google private yoga and find you on Instagram. But if you have a website talking about your private yoga offerings, they might be able to land on your website if they search your name and private yoga or something. But be available to be found, right? Having an updated website and your schedule on your website, I think, maybe I'm just old, closer to 40 than I am 30 now, but I think having your schedule on your website than on an Instagram post is probably more important, right? And I see so many teachers, you know, doing their weekly stories and their weekly posts about like when their classes are and what their schedule is. Then I click on their profile and their website and their link, and it's like, it's blank. I'm like, have a website, have somewhere where people can find you, and it'd be so simple. So simple. Just your picture, about you, your schedule. Come join a class.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I think that is a good reminder. And I think sometimes, you know, social media serves a purpose and I think that it can be beneficial for you, but I think more and more it's like social media is not where people are going to buy something or sign up for something. And I think that's where like website and email list are really crucial pieces of the puzzle. You know, maybe they go check out your social media to kind of, you know, scope you out, see if you're legit, follow along, you know, creep a little bit, whatever their jam is. But I think that like, yeah, exactly. I love that. But I think it's like, you know, your website's kind of like your storefront. And it's like you want to have the opportunity for somebody to be able to sign up and purchase there. I love that so much. I'm curious too, we've talked a little bit about burnout, but I'm curious for you if you have any other kind of tips, strategies, things that work well for you to just kind of stay not burned out, to not get burned out, I guess.
My biggest thing that I wish I could tell every teacher to do and that they would just do it is to just ditch their yoga mat. Like get off the stage or front of the room and walk around. I think that to reducing the physical toll on your body, it has a trickle effect, right? First of all, your own practice. Regardless of what it is, have your own practice. It could be meditation, it could be walking, it could be lifting weights, it could be vinyasa. Have your own practice that nourishes you and protect it. But then when it comes to offering yoga, if you start teaching yoga off the mat, it requires you to simplify your sequencing so that you can verbally communicate it. It'll eliminate some of the quote unquote tricky transitions, which I find may not be as effective or powerful in the grand scheme of the yoga practice. And to just practice the verbal cues. Like, sure, you might have some tricky things in there. You might have some unique things that you want to demo and workshop within the structure of the class, but you should be able to teach sun salutation A and B without being on your mat, right? And that will start to give you more energy because you're starting to watch people practice, and then you can see, oh, this person has this limitation, you know? If I can see that somebody's got a wrist limitation or people in the class are just shaking their wrists, I could adjust my sequence to meet the needs of who's there. So if you learn to practice and teach with less demoing, I think that's the first step, to be honest. But I do find it's a hard ticket to sell. A lot of teachers don't want to hear that, and no one in teacher training is really teaching that. It seems like, from what I see in the newer, younger teachers who are out here teaching in the city. So that's my first thing, is to like just really get into the habit of practicing some of those verbal cues, but then also teach more yin and restorative. It can't all be power vinyasa 5 days a week, and offering some of those softer elements. You're seeing sound baths are really popular these days. Yin, meditation, restorative, those softer sides of yoga nidra. Like, people are much more open to these things. And if you can balance your schedule out by having some of those softer classes in and incorporating them into your personal practice, that's a big one for burnout too. Like, sometimes I just get all my yoga props out, blankets, bolsters, eye pillows, and I use my Apple Watch. I put 30-minute timer and I lie in Shavasana, like propped up with bolsters under my knees and blankets over me. And a 30-minute Shavasana, it's like the best power nap I can take sometimes in the middle of a day to give me that energy. And that's what the practice can look like sometimes. It doesn't have to be crow pose and dancer's pose and chaturangas and all of that. So finding those softer sides of yoga, cueing, teaching off the mat. I would love to, just impart that on anyone and everyone, because it's kept me going for 8 years. I don't think I would have lasted. I still teach 10 classes a week in a few different locations in the city. And I don't think I'd be able to do it if I was one of those teachers that was demoing on my mat. I would have probably burnt out long ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. It's interesting because that's actually like how I was trained to teach with my 300 hour. That's very much how that teacher training program trains, is to be like, it's not that you can't demo ever. A part of what we were taught is like, okay, in this sequence, maybe choose one pose where demoing is going to be powerful, like where it's going to like be necessary. Maybe it's a more advanced pose or a back bend, or there's a little more setup required with props or something. And if you don't have that, then maybe you don't need to do that. But it was being intentional. Be intentional about your demoing, because so much now it's like teacher just goes at the front of the room and they just do the whole practice and they're not even watching. And we've talked about this through this episode, like, all the different things around this, but I love this in terms of taking care of your body and thinking about like the long term and not burning out. And also I feel like yoga nidra has been like my jam lately. Like, that is, I think, especially as like a working mom and, living a busy life and stuff like that, I feel like yoga nidra has been my like, got 30 minutes. I need to just rejuvenate right now. And it's just kind of like what I do. So I'm a big fan of having some sort of practice that's a bit more self-care also.
It's the best, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's amazing. I'm actually doing a yoga nidra training right now so that I can teach it. We've done it like in my teacher training programs and an Ayurveda training I've done, but I feel like I don't really like know, how to create a script and fully lead a class and stuff. And the best part has been that I'm required to practice like 5 times a week now.
Required to nap. I like it.
I'm like, heck yes, I'm into this. It's the best. So I really love those tips and practices. So thank you for that. And I'm curious, as we go to wrap up this, if you can just share a little bit more with us about your mentorship, your business of yoga stuff, what that involves, how people can find that, all that good stuff.
Yeah. So if just through my website, if you head over to jafferyoga.com, there's a tab there for business of yoga. So I've kind of changed all my mentorship wording to focus on the business of yoga, because it's something that I'm really passionate about. I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. My father still runs his own business. My sister's got her own business. And I just realized it's where I really like to spend my time. And so The invitation is to just join the community. I send out one teacher-focused newsletter a month on the 7th of every month. And then that newsletter will have the date for our next Zoom meeting. And so we meet once a month online and just chat about different topics. So some of the topics that I typically put it out as a poll on Instagram about what people want to talk about. Burnout is definitely one that's probably going to come up. Studio expectations and money is probably going to be one that comes up in the next few months. But the most recent one was on retreats, and it was like a huge hit. People really wanted to talk about retreats. So we'll probably do that again. And some of the topics will get repurposed because I don't record these. I want people to feel safe in terms of sharing what they want to share, especially if they're having, challenges in their business. But that's the idea, is to share where your business is successful, where your business is struggling, ask questions, and just simply connect. So when you do sign up for that newsletter, I'm sending out my free Business of Yoga workshop on the 5 pillars of foundation, where I talk about the student first mentality, building community, what else we got there, financial considerations, how to curate your online presence, and talk about avoiding burnout a little bit. So that's just on the website there, and it's free to join. I do have one-on-one mentorship that I do offer, and I do a group mentorship program through a company called Solga, where it's for people of color and people of minority, where we do group mentorship offerings for them. However, my main focus right now is just to build the community, and maybe down the road through there'll be workshops and things that I can create that kind of meet the needs of people that are showing up to these. But this is where my passion lies. I never want to have my own YTT. I think there's enough of those out there. And I just want to find ways in which I can kind of help teachers thrive. I'm tired of seeing good teachers quit. And I also want to go to yoga classes where I know the teacher's going to get off the mat and give me a hands-on assist. So I just want to teach as many people to do that so that I have more classes to go to. It's really just born out of a selfish need.
I love it. Yeah, I'm a sucker for a good assist too. But no, I love that. We'll make sure that there's a link to that. And I think it's amazing that you're offering this to teachers. So hopefully some people will join the community, because I think that, yeah, we need this. I think teachers need this. So I'm really grateful that you're offering this.
Thanks, Amanda. Grateful for what you offer too. Your podcasts are amazing.
Oh, thank you. And anywhere else people can go to find you if they want to follow along, connect, all that good stuff?
Yeah, just the website. Everything's there. The newsletter's there. The retreats are there. I have 2 international retreats now, so Costa Rica and Mexico, as well as a local one here in Ontario, if anyone's in and around Toronto and surrounding neighborhoods. So yeah, just the website, jafferyoga.com.
Amazing. We'll make sure there's links to that in the show notes. And yeah, Jaffer, thank you so much for your time today. This has been really great. And I'm so grateful we got a chance to reconnect.
Me too. Thanks, Amanda.
All right, my friends, I hope that you enjoyed that episode of the podcast with Jaffer Hussain. Make sure you go check him out. Like he said, jafferyoga.com. You can check out the mentorship program that he's offering and the other resources that he's offering to yoga teachers, as well as check out his membership, his classes, all of that good stuff. As always, a big thank you to the sponsors for this episode, Offering Tree and Coach Pals. Make sure you guys go check them out, see how they could support you in your business and with your business goals. And of course, a big thank you to you for listening to the show. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, supporting, all that good stuff. I couldn't do it without you guys. All right, see you next week. Bye for now. Thank you so much for tuning in for this episode of the podcast. To find links, notes, resources, and everything mentioned in today and all episodes of the show, you can head on over to mbomyoga.com. You can find the podcast and myself on Facebook and social media at Mastering the Business of Yoga. And I would love for you to join the private Facebook community, Yoga Business Badasses. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please make sure you reach out to me at info@mbomyoga.com. And last of all, if you enjoyed this episode of the show, please make sure you hit subscribe and leave a review for the podcast. It would mean the world. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Namaste.